Hello everyone. Another video that is dedicated to transgender people, their history, and formation. But before you start, I ask you to put your finger up to subscribe, and if it's not difficult, to write a comment. A transgender person, often abbreviated to trans person, is someone whose gender identity or gender expression does not correspond with the sex they were assigned at birth, gender dysphoria, which they may seek to alleviate through transitioning, different name and set of pronouns in the process. They may pursue gender-affirming care such as hormone replacement therapy and various gender-affirming surgeries. Not all transgender people desire these treatments, and others may be unable to access them for financial or medical reasons. Those who do desire to medically transition to another sex may identify as transsexual. Transgender is an umbrella term. In addition to trans men and trans women, it may also include people who are non-binary. Other definitions of transgender also include people who belong to a third gender, or else conceptualize transgender people as a third gender, 9, 10, and the term may be defined very broadly to include crossdressers. Some two-spirit people may also identify as transgender. Gender identity is distinct from sexual orientation, and transgender people may be of any sexual orientation. The opposite of transgender is cisgender, which describes people whose gender identity matches their assigned sex. Statistics on the number of transgender people vary widely, in part due to differing definitions of transgender. 16. Some countries, such as Canada, collect census data on transgender people. Transgender identity is generally found in less than 1% of the worldwide population, with figures ranging from less than 0.1% to 0.6%. Many transgender people face discrimination in the workplace, in accessing public accommodations, and in healthcare. In many places, they are not legally protected from discrimination. Transgender people have existed since ancient times. A wide range of societies had traditional third gender roles, or otherwise accepted trans people in some form. A precise history is difficult because the modern concept of being transgender, and gender in general, did not develop until the mid-1900s. Historical understandings are thus inherently filtered through modern principles, and were largely viewed through a medical lens until the late 1900s. The Hippocratic Corpus, interpreting the writing of Herodotus, describes the disease of the Scythians, regarding the NRE, which it attributes to impotency due to riding on a horse without stirrups. This reference was well discussed by medical writings of the 1500s, 1700s. Pierre Petit, writing in 1596, viewed the Scythian disease as natural variation, but by the 1700s writers viewed it as a melancholy, or hysterical psychiatric disease. By the early 1800s, being transgender separate from Hippocrates' idea of it was claimed to be widely known, but remained poorly documented. Both trans women and trans men were cited in European insane asylums of the early 1800s. One of the earliest recorded transgender people in America was Thomas I.N.E. Hall, a 17th-century colonial servant. The most complete account of the time came from the life of the Chevalier d'Eon, 1728–1810, a French diplomat. As cross-dressing became more widespread in the late 1800s, discussion of transgender people increased greatly, and writers attempted to explain the origins of being transgender. Much study came out of Germany, and was exported to other Western audiences. Cross-dressing was seen in a pragmatic light until the late 1800s. It had previously served a satirical or disguising purpose. But in the latter half of the 1800s, cross-dressing and being transgender became viewed as an increasing societal danger. William A. Hammond wrote an 1882 account of transgender Pueblo shamans, mojiretos, comparing them to the Scythian disease. Other writers of the late 1700s and 1800s, including Hammond's associates in the American Neurological Association, had noted the widespread nature of transgender cultural practices among native peoples. Explanations varied, but authors generally did not ascribe native transgender practices to psychiatric causes, instead condemning the practices in a religious and moral sense. Native groups provided much study on the subject, and perhaps the majority of all study until after World War II. Critical studies first began to emerge in the late 1800s in Germany, with the works of Magnus Hirschfeld. Hirschfeld coined the term transvestite in 1910 as the scope of transgender study grew. His work would lead to the 1919 founding of the Institute für Sexualwissenschaft in Berlin. Though Hirschfeld's legacy is disputed, he revolutionized the field of study. The institute was destroyed when the Nazis seized power in 1933, and its research was infamously burned in the May 1933 Nazi book burnings. Transgender issues went largely out of the public eye until after World War II. Even when they re-emerged, they reflected a forensic psychology approach, unlike the more sexological that had been employed in the lost German research. Thank you for listening to the first part. If you liked it, put your finger up and subscribe. If you liked something or didn't like it, write in the comments. Thanks again. Love each other and yourself.